presentation today is very specific to non-congregate shelter. I'm more than willing to take your LIHTC questions. I don't mean it like that, but I want you to understand that we've geared the presentation specifically to non-congregate shelter. The LIHTC timeline is it'll be on the 2024 QAP. So we have a year to build that out and what that's going to look like. And we're starting to work on that now. And you'll see a lot of education opportunities getting pushed out in the fall from us to make sure that everyone understands what that layering on top of LIHTC is, because LIHTC is a monster of a program, both in terms of the amount of money we have access to, but also in terms of the compliance and what it's going to take for us to build out this model of how we want to do wraparound services in a leased unit, permanent unit kind of model. So I hope that answered your question.
Yeah. I think primarily it was around partnering something more oriented toward PSH. So I think it was more about the permanent supportive housing structure in a tax credit setting. And so that's the way that it was presented. But like Kelly said, this is something that we can really talk about in the future months. This is something that we don't have to stop talking about, because we do want to be able to spend the money in a way that helps a broad range of different housing opportunities, which includes permanent supportive housing. So I think that is a really strong, there's just a lot of opportunity that we have with that $87 million. And LIHTC stands for the Low Income Housing Tax Credit Program, for everyone who's not aware of that. And so that is partnered with the tax credit program opens up kind of at the beginning of every year. And so that develops the affordable housing throughout our state. And we spend a lot of money on that. So, and time, it just opened up. The tax credits for 2023 were just, the final applications were just received last week. And so we're starting to review those for 2023. And the HOMEARP program with tax credits and rental housing are going to be extended, or not extended, but it's for the 24 tax credit season. So just be aware of that. What does the 100% cover for rehab acquisition projects? Is this a reimbursable grant in which a nonprofit will expend funds and DCA will reimburse? Also, is match required for this grant? If so, what percentage? Thank you. Okay, and we're gonna jump into this, but these are great questions. So yes, 100% of the building of a non-congregate shelter can be paid for by the HOMEARP program. However, we do encourage leveraging with other types of programming. Obviously, we want to be able to spend the money throughout the state, and if we're able to give a part of the funding for lots of different communities throughout the state, that's really what we want to do, instead of spending all of the money in maybe 2 or 3 different places. And so just be aware of that. However, there is not a match requirement. So this is not something that is like an ESG type grant, whereas you have to have that match in order to apply. That's not the case in this circumstance. You do not have to have a match. However, we are encouraging a leveraging of funding in order to ensure that we can fund as many programs and projects as possible. Also, is this a reimbursable grant? No, you guys, we would give the money and then you would spend it. So it's not the other way around, which I'm sure many of you are really excited about. So it's not a reimbursable grant. It's one that will give you the money and then you'll have it to spend. So, but again, this is for bricks and sticks. It is not for supportive services. And so will supportive services be an eligible activity for state HOMEARP funds? We are utilizing the supportive services in another type of area. We're not allowed to use HOMEARP funds when in the building that we are building. And so it's an either or kind of situation. So we are actually working on the non-congregate shelter piece as far as building the buildings. And so that is, that should kind of help you out there. So as far as supportive services, and I know that there was an answer here. So therefore, when we're looking at budgets, your nonprofit will have to supply, or whatever the agency is, nonprofit or not. You can be a for-profit too. However, usually it's nonprofits, would have to be able to show us that they can provide the supportive services on their own, outside of HOMEARP funding, in order to show that they can maintain the non-congregate shelter. We have used HOMEARP funds from other jurisdictions for single-family rental with voucher residents, formerly homeless and supportive services. Would this be an eligible use? That is a really good question. I'm guessing it's a TBRA type situation, or TBRA program that we do have with HOMEARP is being extended toward the COVID relief funds in the CARES Act. And I think Samantha has some additional information for that.
Sure. When we originally planned our allocation plan, we took a look at all the eligible activities that we could do under this grant, and we talked to stakeholders, and we talked within DCA's homeless assistance programs to find out what gaps to fill. And we did earmark some money for tenant-based rental assistance if needed to cover some folks who are receiving vouchers currently under some COVID relief money, so that if when the funds are no longer available, we could cover additional rent payments for them so that they would have some financing for their rent. We did not anticipate creating a new tenant-based rental assistance program. We frankly don't have the bandwidth here at DCA to manage a separate program than that. Our primary use of these funds, we wanted to build more units that were supportive housing, and so that those can exist in the rental ecosystem as supportive housing for people. And we wanted to supply what is a new concept and definitely a need, the non-congregate shelter units. Beyond that, we were not going to spend, we do have some money earmarked for supportive services with the intent of helping people move into those units to buy furniture for them or to provide moving expenses and other things. But we were not going to set up new programs to just do supportive services or just do tenant-based rental assistance. But we do have that money available. So if there is a need, and between now and when at the end of this grant term, which is 2030, we could consider that if there's a strong need for that. But it wasn't our intent to build it out, because it would require us to staff it up and administrate it and create almost a completely separate program for that. And Kelly, I don't know if you want to add to that too, or anyone else.
Yeah, we have.
No, I thought that was a brilliant answer.
Thanks.
Yeah, that was good. And so there's some additional questions as far as, Kelly clarified, and I was not clear with that. It is a reimbursable grant. So we can help pay for the acquisition of property and provide startup funds, but we're going to need to pay for work completed as it is completed and not give all the funds up front. So what usually happens in the tax credit realm at DCA with regards to home funds is while construction is going on, they ask for disbursements as it goes along. And so if I'm not mistaken, they can be funds that have already been expended, but also funds that are to be expended, but it's not given, you wouldn't be given like $4 million in one fell swoop. It would be something that would be dispersed, as the construction is going on, and showing that you're meeting construction markers while you're going along, to show that things are getting done. So it's not a bulk amount of money that you'll be receiving if you get funded. And so it's something that would be dispersed as you go along. Is it possible to build units with non-congregate shelter funding that are included in the same facility with low-income housing tax credit units? That goes back to what Kelly was talking about before, as far as the difference between the non-congregate shelter and tax credit, where one is leasable and the other is not. I think that to do a multi-use, which is essentially what you're asking for, I don't think that is necessarily impossible. I think that that's something we could work out, but you would need to be very clear about which building is doing what. Okay, because tax credit is very specific around with the 8609s and things around what you're able to charge with regards to the building. And so you would need to be really clear as far as what are tax credit units and what's non-congregate shelter. Also, the funding is going to be distributed at different times. So the tax credit building is obviously going to be built at a later time versus the non-congregate shelter, because you need to get started within a year of building that non-congregate shelter. You can't wait. And so, so it would have to be a phased program if that's really what you're wanting to do. Okay, so I hope that answered that question.
Well, let me add
Okay.
something really quickly.
Yeah.
So these LIHTC questions are excellent questions. And I want to reiterate that the 2024 QAP process is just getting started. And that's where you're going to see all of these decisions being made, because HOMEARP is going to ride over the top of the 2024 QAP as a layer of funding for it. So the QAP will decide a lot of these very specific and unique situations that you're discussing. Do you want to put non-congregate shelter and LIHTC in the same place? Well, that is a specific form of LIHTC, and LIHTC would be the lead on that process. My recommendation is, and I will put it in the chat, that you participate in the listening sessions that are coming up, and that you discuss what your specific needs are and what you would like to see in this 24 QAP there, so that the QAP has options in it that are driving the HOMEARP portion of the layering. Until we know what's in the QAP, we can't tell you how HOMEARP is or is not going to be able to be layered over the top of it. That because of the compliance portion with the LIHTC, the QAP drives everything when you start talking about these leasable units. $65 million sounds like a lot of money, but when you're talking about building ADA compliant units under Davis-Bacon, it's not. And so the best way for us in Georgia to leverage those funds, especially considering we have a state tax credit, was to partner with the LIHTC program. And that is very specifically outlined in the Georgia plan. So the only leasable units that we have scheduled to be built under our HOMEARP plan are on top of the 24, 25, and 26 LIHTC program until the money runs out. So I'll put the listening session dates or the link to the listening session information in the chat. I would really, really encourage you to participate in those.
Yep, they're coming up. And they're also sent out with the listserv that we just sent out too. So we have that included as well, Kelly. So, and the last chat, and then I'm going to go back to the PowerPoint. So the last one is, so to be clear, building or rehabilitating single family rental properties for supportive housing is not an eligible use. It has to be multifamily, and that is correct. It does need to be multiple units. So going back to the PowerPoint here, really it's that community-driven process. We really encourage everyone to be looking at the data. We encourage you to be looking at different populations as far as who you're serving, and then really partnering with a lot of groups in your area. So again, with the data, this is the whole program is based on the McKinney-Vento definition of homelessness. And so homeless and at risk of homelessness takes on a completely different view because it's through the eyes of the school system. And so homelessness includes people who are doubling up, living on couches, and those types of situations other than those not fit for human habitation, which is the traditional definition of homelessness. So just be aware of that. At risk of homelessness also takes on an additional piece as well. So So just be sure that you're kind of taking a look at the data, the populations that are able to be served. It really does also broaden the amount of groups that we're able to help, specifically with non-congregate shelter.